Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the part 7 of a chronological read through the Bible. Now, today's passage covers Genesis chapter 21, starting in verse 8 through chapter 24. I really wanted to focus on one part which I often teach along with the armor of God, and that is Abraham's time of testing. Now, I have this verse I normally like to connect with this, and out of Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. And I say this because it is a time of testing, and we enter into the school of faith at this point. We must all occasionally take tests. And we never really know where we are spiritually until we pass through that time of testing. But God did not just spring this incredible time of testing upon Abraham. Abraham had been going through a time of training before coming to this great moment of testing his faith and really seeing what his greatest love was. I want you to think of this. God first tested him with a family test, and that was he had to leave his home. He had to leave that which he knew to go to a land which he did not know anything of. And then there was a fellowship test, and that was he willing to part ways with Lot? Abraham could have said, "Oh no, Lot, you stay here and we'll try to work this out among our herdsmen." He had to trust the Lord in that test as well. And then there was a fighting test when he went to rescue Lot and in the great battle of the kings. Then there was the fortune test, the test of wealth. He turned down that which the king of Sodom offered to him. He could have taken that and said, I really should take this because I don't know, my future family or my family right now, we need that money. But no, he turned it down because he said, this is unholy and this is not what I fought this battle for. And then there was the fatherhood test which Abraham went through. He kind of fails it because he ends up with Ishmael. So he didn't do so well with that test. But then there is the great faith test. And would he walk on the promises of God? We oftentimes find what our real love is. And you make time for the things that are important to you. If you're not willing to make a sacrifice of time, then that thing's not important to you. People will give up all kinds of things. They even risk their lives for that which is important to them. So sometimes when you see that people aren't willing to let certain things go, to be at church or to go out witnessing or to be on a mission trip or to support a mission trip, then you begin to realize what's really important to people. And so I think that this is something for each to think about, to consider. What is important to you? What is your great love? What is your great passion? What's the one thing that you would be unwilling to give up? Now, the spiritual answer is God. But just for a second, think of what is so important to you that you would not be willing to let go of it. And then, once you have that in mind, do you have that in mind? What's so important that you wouldn't be willing to let go of it, or let go of it easily? And now, here's the test. Does that thing that you have in your mind, would you be willing to give it up to follow God? Would you be willing to give it up for the Lord if He was to ask you? That's why when Abraham is confronted with this test, he's able to stand firm. And he's able to stand firm because he knows the promises which God has already given to him. So I just want to read a few verses here, starting in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. Now, it came about after these things that God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And it's always neat. Here am I. Here am I, God. Are you listening for God's voice? So if he calls your name, you can say, Here am I. I think of Samuel. He heard his name many times and would run into Eli. He didn't know what the voice of God sounded like, and he thought that it was Eli, the priest, the high priest, calling him. And each time he ran in, and finally Eli, each time coming out of a sleep, finally by the third time he realizes, oh wait, hey, when you, Samuel, when you hear your name called again, it's Lord. Say, speak, Lord. Your servant listens. Abraham, he already knew the voice of the Lord. He knew it was God calling his name. He said, take now your son, your only son. Ishmael's already been sent away, right? Whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. That's all God said. Offer him there. You have to think his heart had to sink. How would he face his wife? How could he take this son that he loves, this promised child, and now offer this child to God as a burnt offering? He understood what that meant as soon as God said, offer your child. In verse 3, it says, So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. He split wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place which God told him. It's not any picture of him delaying, of him putting it off. He responds to the call of God and responds quickly. How long does it take for you to respond to the call of God? When God tells you, do this, act upon it. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you. He didn't say, I will return to you, but he gives the picture that we are going to return. He doesn't have the word we, but he says, return to you. So it really has the picture that he already has faith that God's going to work, God's going to act. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, My father? And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? That had to make Abraham's heart sink for a minute. Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the 2 of them walked on together. God will provide the lamb. God provided a lamb for each of us on Calvary. He provided his son for us. And like Isaac, Christ carried his cross. Now he ended up, of course we know Simon of Cyrene carried it the remainder of the way, but he bore the weight. You have to think as he went up that mountain, if he remembered Isaac and Abraham going up the mountain together. Abraham takes his son after he's built the altar, after he's laid the wood upon the altar, and binds Isaac up. And I oftentimes point out this was an act of faith really in both of their hearts, an act of obedience even in Isaac's, because we don't know the exact age of Isaac. We would say he was, I would think, at least 13, maybe a little older than that. Do you think that he could have fought off a man that's 100 years old? Well, I would think so. So he submitted to his father. He trusted his father. Can we trust God like Isaac trusted Abraham? I hope you can. I hope and pray that you can. Abraham went as far as lifting the knife in his hand, ready to take the life of his son. Let's look at what Hebrews has to say on this. And Hebrews points out, really beginning in verse 8 of Hebrews chapter 11, it points out the faith that Abraham had, that by faith when he was called, obeyed by going to the place which was he was to receive his inheritance. He went out not knowing where he was going. He followed God each step of the way. But if we look down to verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offered up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. Verse 19, he considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type, meaning a type of Christ. So Abraham believed the promises of God so much that he knew that this promised son, Isaac, who was told to him by God, this will be the child that all your future offspring will come from, your generations, he trusted that God would even raise Isaac from the dead, because God had already told him that Isaac would carry on a godly line, would be a father of many. And Abraham trusted and believed this to the point that he said, certainly then God will raise my son from the dead. Of course, God did provide a ram caught in the thicket. The angel stops Abraham from killing Isaac right as the knife is about to drive into Isaac, and holds his hand. And a ram caught in the thicket is provided. It's at that very place that the temple of God would be constructed, and the temple would stand there until it was destroyed first by the Babylonians and then later by the Romans. We have the promise that one day another temple will be built, and I know some eagerly await that. I don't necessarily eagerly await it because that is truly the sign of the end of times. We are at that point when we see a temple being rebuilt or constructed on that ground. I want you to consider, what is most important to you? And are you willing to give that to God? Are you willing to follow God wherever He leads? We'll sing in church oftentimes, wherever He leads, I'll go. I'll follow my Christ who loves me so. Wherever He leads, I'll go. Are you willing to follow Him? I hope so. Chapter 24, we have a death, but we also have a marriage which takes place at the end of this. Sarah dies, and then Abraham sends his servant, an unnamed servant, to go in search of a wife for Isaac. And there's many pictures of this servant being like the Holy Spirit in a way. I'm not saying it is the Holy Spirit, but it is a type, in the sense of Isaac being a type of Christ. The servant is not mentioned because the story is not about the servant. The story is about his master Isaac, and he's pointing everything to Isaac. Consider where your faith is today, and how much do you trust the Lord? Well, I pray again that this has been a uplifting and a challenging read for you today. And I hope to see you back again tomorrow. God bless.